What would you do if your HOA demanded you take down the backyard shed your grandfather built with his own hands? Imagine walking out one morning, coffee in hand, and finding a bright orange notice taped to the door of a shed that stood longer than half the houses in your neighborhood. That's exactly what happened to me. My name's Bill Thompson. I'm 59 years old, a retired carpenter, and I've lived in Maple Ridge for nearly 25 years. Out behind my house sits a shed my granddad and I built together back in 1989. It's not fancy, just cedar planks, a tin roof, and a set of double doors I carved by hand. That shed held my tools, my kids' bikes, Christmas decorations, and even served as a makeshift clubhouse when my boys were small. To me, it's history. To Karen, our HOA president, it was a violation of community standards. Maple Ridge used to be a place where neighbors swapped tomatoes over fences, grilled on weekends, and never cared if your paint faded a little. The HOA handled mowing the common park and keeping the pool clean. And that was about it. Then Karen showed up. She moved in with her color-coded binder and a smile you could cut glass with. Within a year, she had the president's gavel in her hand, and Maple Ridge turned from a neighborhood into a rule book. She started small lawn height, mailbox shapes, even what curtains you could hang in front windows. Then she started going after sheds. All sheds, she said at the next meeting, must be HOA approved, vinyl sided, and natural beige. So when I found that orange notice stapled to my grandfather's shed, my blood boiled. Violation notice structure, non-compliant wooden shed directive removed within 30 days or face $200 daily fines. $200 a day for a shed older than her clipboard. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in carrying a photo of my grandfather and me standing in front of that shed in 1989, grinning like fools with sawdust in our hair. This isn't just a shed. I told the room, it's a piece of my family. It's safe. It's solid. And it's been here for over 3 decades. Longer than your bylaws. Karen didn't blink. Mr. Thompson, nostalgia doesn't override compliance. The shed is unsightly and non-uniform. It must go. Unsightly, I barked. This shed has outlasted 2 hurricanes and 3 HOA presidents. It'll outlast you too. She smirked and banged her gavel. Decision final. The fines started the next day. Week 1. Shed violation $1. 400 accrued. Week 2. Improperly stored ladder. Week 3. Backyard clutter visible from neighboring lot. It wasn't about the shed, it was about power. So I went to the office supply store, bought myself a thick red binder, and began sliding every notice inside. On the front, I scrolled in black marker shed defense, Exhibit A. Nancy, my wife, gave me a look over her glasses. Bill, what are you doing? I sipped my coffee and said, building a wall she can't knock down. And then, one by one, the neighbors started knocking. The Johnsons with their tool shed from the 90s find, the Martinez family with their playhouse find, even old Mrs. Green, who'd kept a tiny potting shed for her roses, got a notice for non-approved structure. They all came to me, holding their letters like eviction notices. And one night, we all stood under the dim light of my shed, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, the cedar boards creaking behind me. They can't knock us all down, I told them. Not if we stand together. Earl, the army vet from 2 doors down, raised his fist. Then let's stand, right here, beside this shed. And just like that, in the shadow of those cedar planks, the battle for Maple Ridge began. That night by the shed, with lanterns swaying and neighbors murmuring in low, angry voices, I realized something. Karen had the title, the gavel, and the bylaws, but we had the people. My grandfather's old shed wasn't just 4 walls and a roof anymore. It was our rally point. The very next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and started writing. By noon, I had it drafted. We, the undersigned residents of Maple Ridge, hereby call for the recall of HOA President Karen Whitfield on grounds of abuse of authority, selective enforcement, and harassment of homeowners. Nancy peeked over my shoulder, smirked, and said, "You really think folks will sign this?" I tapped the paper. "I don't think." "I know." The Johnsons signed first. Mr. Johnson scrawled his name across the page so hard the pen nearly tore through. She told me my shed's a hazard. That shed's older than half the trees on this street. She can take a hike. The Martinezes signed next. Mrs. Martinez shook her head, anger in her eyes. She said our kid's playhouse is a violation. My kids built that with their uncle. She's not tearing it down. Even Mrs. Green signed, her hand trembling but her voice firm. My Harold built that potting shed for me before he passed. Karen's not taking it. Not now. Not ever. By the end of the day, I had 15 names. By the end of the week, 40. Word spread like wildfire. Karen noticed. Of course she did. Within days, fresh violation letters hit doorsteps like clockwork. The Johnsons got fined for improper gutter maintenance. The Martinezes were cited for non-uniform patio furniture. Mrs. Green Sweet Mrs. Green was fined for excessive decorative lawn gnomes. And me, I got 3 violations in one envelope. Shed paint peeling. Improperly stored firewood. Backyard security light too bright. I slid each letter into my binder and marked a new tab in red ink retaliation. That binder was getting heavy, like a shield forged from paper, but instead of breaking us, Karen just hardened our resolve. At the grocery store, folks whispered. Bill, you got the petition on you at church. Hands tugged at my sleeve. Where do I sign? At the diner. The waitress handed me a slice of pie with a folded petition signature tucked under the plate. By mid-month, I had 70 names, well over the majority we needed. So we gathered again. Not in the HOA's sterile community hall, but right there behind my shed. Lanterns glowed along the fence. Kids climbed onto overturned buckets for seats. Adults huddled close. Anger simmering, but hope stronger. I raised the clipboard high. Karen thinks she can break us with fines, threats, and her gavel, but we've got 70 voices saying otherwise. This shed stays. Your sheds stay. Your playhouses. Your porches. Your gardens, they all stay. And come recall day, Karen goes. The cheer that followed rattled the boards of the shed. Earl slammed his fist into the cedar wall and hollered, Long live the shed, and the chant caught until the whole block was shouting it. For the first time in a long while, Maple Ridge felt alive. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to back off quietly. She was the type to fight dirty. And she was just getting started. Karen wasted no time throwing her first counterpunch. A week after our shedside meeting, every single mailbox in Maple Ridge had a glossy flyer crammed inside. On the front, a stock photo of beige vinyl sheds lined up like toy blocks, perfectly uniform. Across the top in screaming red letters, Keep Maple Ridge beautiful, support consistency, support Karen. The back was worse. Paragraph after paragraph painting me as the villain. According to Karen, I was a disruptive element, lowering property values and manipulating vulnerable residents. My name, Bill Thompson, was bolded 3 times, like she wanted to brand it into everyone's mind. Nancy read it at the kitchen table, scoffed, and said, Well, honey, looks like you made the front page of her fantasy novel. I slid it into the red binder, marked a new tab, propaganda. If she's calling me out this loud, I said, she's scared. But the flyers were only the start. A few days later, neighbors started finding community risk reports shoved under their doors in unmarked envelopes. Inside were grainy black and white photos taken at night. A kid's bike left in a yard. A ladder leaning against a wall. Mrs. Green's gnome circled in red pen, each stamped with captions like safety hazard or code violation. Lord, Mrs. Martinez showed up at my door, hands shaking as she held her packet. Bill, she had someone in my backyard with a camera. My kids sleep 10 feet from that playhouse. Earl clenched his fists beside me. She ain't enforcing rules anymore. She's stalking people. I stood there in the glow of my back porch light, looking at my grandfather's shed behind me, and felt something burn deep in my chest. Karen thought fear could break us. She didn't realize fear had already died in Maple Ridge. Then came the barrage of fines. The Johnsons' mailbox post leaning the Martinez's unauthorized chalk drawings on driveway. Misses. Green gnome placement excessive. Repeat violation. And me, 4 citations in 48 hours. Shed door hinges squeaky. Stacked firewood height exceeds limit. Backyard light bulb not HOA approved wattage. Tin roof reflecting sunlight excessively. I stuffed them all into the binder and carved a new tab, harassment. That thing was getting so heavy I joked to Nancy it could double as a dumbbell. But Karen's dirty tricks backfired. At church that Sunday, Earl stood up mid-service, waving a violation letter. If Karen thinks my rusty grill is Maple Ridge's biggest threat, then she needs a new pair of glasses. The whole congregation laughed, clapped, and some even chanted, "Save the shed right there in the pews." At the diner, someone pinned one of her flyers to the community board with a sticky note across it, comedy section. What Karen didn't get was simple. Every attack she threw just made us stronger. By month's end, the recall election date was set. That night, neighbors packed into my backyard. Shoulder to shoulder beneath the cedar shed, Karen wanted gone. Lanterns glowed along the fence line. Kids played tag around the garden, and the air hummed with energy. I lifted the binder high. She's thrown fines, flyers, and fear at us. But look around, we're still standing. And on recall day, we'll show her Maple Ridge doesn't belong to one woman with a gavel. It belongs to us. The cheer that rolled out shook the walls of that shed. Evelyn thumped her cane on the dirt like a drum, chanting, "Our sheds, our rules," until the whole crowd picked it up, echoing into the night. Karen thought she could turn me into Maple Ridge's villain. Instead, she'd made herself the enemy of everyone with a backyard, and the fight was only heating up. The morning of the recall vote felt like a storm was rolling in. Even though the sky was clear, folks streamed into the Maple Ridge Community Center like they were marching into court, clutching ballots as if they were weapons. Nobody smiled. Nobody joked. It was all tight jaws and narrowed eyes. At the front sat the ballot box, a plain steel container that suddenly looked heavier than a vault. Volunteers we trusted manned the table, checking names and handing out slips of paper. Each ballot that dropped in landed with a thunk that made the air tremble. And at the head table, Karen. She wore a blazer sharp enough to cut glass, gavel resting in front of her like a loaded pistol. She plastered on a smile, but her eyes told a different story, darting, calculating, already sensing the tide was against her. When my turn came, I walked forward slow, ballot in hand. Karen's gaze pinned me, cold as steel. I folded the paper neat, dropped it into the box, and the sound cracked through the room like a hammer hitting a coffin lid. Earl leaned over as I sat back down and whispered, "Sounded like Judgment Day." The counting took forever, though in truth it was only minutes. Carla, Mrs. Patel, and another volunteer huddled in the corner, tallying slips while the entire room held its breath. You could hear every shuffle of paper, every scratch of a pen. Evelyn's cane tapped against the tile. Nervous and steady like a clock, Nancy squeezed my hand until my knuckles ached. Finally, Carla stood, paper trembling in her hand. Her voice wavered for a second, then came clear and strong. Votes for recall 93. Votes against 27. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the place erupted. Cheers. Claps. Stomping feet. The Johnson kids jumped up and down. Mrs. Green burst into tears. Earl let out a holler that shook the ceiling tiles. The chant started somewhere in the back, save the shed, and rolled forward until the whole room was thundering it. But Karen wasn't about to leave with grace. She slammed her gavel on the table so hard the sound cracked like lightning. "This election is invalid," she shrieked. Her face twisted red. "You're all jeopardizing your property values. This community will regret this day." Nobody listened. The roar of relief drowned her out. Karen shoved back her chair, eyes blazing. "This isn't over," she spat, before storming out, heels hammering the floor like gunshots. The door slammed behind her, and for the first time in years, Maple Ridge breathed free. That night, we gathered in my backyard by the cedar shed. Lanterns hung from the branches. Kids chased fireflies, and neighbors toasted with cider and beer. Earl climbed onto an old crate, raised his mug, and shouted, "Two bills shed the place that broke the Queen's crown." The cheer that followed rattled the wooden boards behind me. For the first time in a long time, Maple Ridge sounded alive. But as I stood there, binder heavy in my arm, I knew better than to think it was finished. Karen wasn't the type to disappear into the night. No, she'd be back. And the next round, she'd come out swinging dirtier than ever. For about 2 weeks after the recall, Maple Ridge felt almost normal again. Kids biked through cul-de-sacs. Mrs. Green replanted her roses, and the Johnsons painted their shed bright red just because they could. It was like the neighborhood could finally breathe without Karen's rules hanging over our heads. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't finished. Women like hair don't fade away. They plot. The first strike came in the form of a thick envelope, dropped off by a deputy who looked downright embarrassed. "Sorry. Bill," he muttered. "You've been served." Inside, a lawsuit. Karen accused me personally of defamation, harassment, and willful destruction of her reputation. She even demanded my shed be torn down as part of the damages. Nancy flipped through the pages, snorted, and tossed them onto the table. "She calls you the harasser." She stalked the Martinez's yard with a camera at midnight. Still, seeing my name printed in legal ink made my stomach twist. I called my friend Alan, a lawyer I used to build cabinets with before he went to law school. He read 3 pages, chuckled, and said, "Classic slap suit, strategic lawsuit, against public participation. Judges hate this junk." He was right. At the hearing, the judge dismissed it in under 15 minutes. Karen stormed out of the courtroom, face redder than a stop sign, but not before locking me with a glare sharp enough to cut wood. The second strike was sneakier. One night around midnight, my motion light snapped on. The security camera caught 2 figures creeping toward the shed. One had a crowbar, the other a spray can. They managed to scrawl the word violation in dripping red paint across the doors before bolting when the light flared. Earl's deer cam down the block caught their license plate. Turned out the truck belonged to a contractor Karen had used for compliance inspections. The sheriff filed charges. Karen denied everything, of course, but nobody in Maple Ridge believed her for a second. Then came the financial bombshell. The new board dug into HOA records, and what they found nearly knocked us all off our feet. Tens of thousands of dollars missing. Consulting fees paid to Karen's cousin. Legal retainers with no lawyers attached. Even HOA credit card charges at fancy boutiques and hotels. At the next meeting, Carla projected the numbers on the wall. Gasps echoed through the room. She fined me for a garden trellis. Mrs. Martinez shouted, while she was buying handbags with our money. Carla didn't flinch. This report has been forwarded to the county prosecutor. The cheer that followed shook the windows. But Karen's last move was the ugliest. The week before Christmas, Earl pounded on my door in the middle of the night. Bill grabbed a flashlight. Now. We sprinted down to the stormwater ditch at the edge of Maple Ridge. The lock on the drainage gate had been cut clean through. Water gushing faster than it should. If it had given way completely, half the lower lights, including mine, would have been underwater by dawn. Deputy Collins shook his head as the water roared. This wasn't an accident. Somebody wanted damage. Nancy clutched my arm, voice trembling. She'd flood homes just to get back at us. I looked at my shed silhouetted in the moonlight and clenched my fists. She's desperate, I said, and desperate people are dangerous. But what Karen didn't see was his desperate moves don't break people who've already stood up once. They weld them tighter together. She thought lawsuits, thugs, and sabotage would weaken Maple Ridge. Instead, she just made us stronger. And like my cedar shed, we weren't going anywhere. January rolled in with frost on the rooftops, but Maple Ridge burned with something warmer than any furnace unity. After Karen's stunt with the drainage ditch, folks weren't scared anymore. They were fired up. The whole community realized her fight wasn't just against one shed. It was against everything that made our neighborhood feel like home. So when Carla, our new HOA chair, called for a gathering, it wasn't in the sterile community center Karen had ruled like a courtroom. No, it was in my backyard, right in front of the non-compliant cedar shed that had started it all. Neighbors brought folding chairs, crock pots of chili, and thermoses of cider. Kids draped strings of lights across the shed roof, laughing as they balanced on ladders. Someone set up a speaker playing old rock tunes, and the air filled with the smell of barbecue. That shed, once a target for fines, glowed like a beacon. Carla climbed onto a crate and raised her voice. This isn't just Bill's shed anymore. It's our shed. It's where we gathered when we had no voice, where we found our strength. Tonight, I move that we declare it a Maple Ridge Heritage Landmark. The cheer that erupted nearly shook the tin roof. Evelyn pounded her cane into the dirt like a war drum. Earl hollered, "Long live the shed," and the whole crowd laughed, tears in their eyes. From that night, everything shifted. Instead of bleeding us dry with fines, the board launched the Neighbor Fund. Dues went to real needs, repairing fences, patching roofs, buying a new swing set for the park. Instead of punishing individuality, the board started a community treasures registry. The Johnsons' red shed registered. The Martinez's playhouse preserved. Mrs. Green's garden gnomes officially recognized as historic features. Everything Karen once labeled non-compliant became a badge of pride. And people outside Maple Ridge took notice. Letters arrived from all over the country. From Ohio, they tried to bulldoze the deck my dad built. Your shed gave us the courage to fight. From Florida, we were fined for a chicken coop. We started a recall after hearing about Maple Ridge. From Texas, a photo of 30 neighbors gathered around an old barn, holding a banner that read, "Stand like Maple Ridge." One night, Nancy and I sat at the kitchen table reading them aloud. She smiled, her hand on mine. "Bill, your grandfather built a shed. He didn't know he built a lighthouse." I swallowed hard, blinking fast. She was right. By spring, we threw the first annual shed festival. Neighbors decorated their sheds with lanterns, flags, even murals. Kids turned mine into a stage for a puppet show. Families wandered from yard to yard, sipping lemonade, laughing, celebrating the very things Karen had once tried to erase. At sunset, everyone gathered in front of my cedar shed. Strings of lights twinkled across the roof. The doors painted fresh, and neighbors crowded shoulder to shoulder. Carla pulled a bronze plaque from a cloth bag and held it high before bolting it onto the wall. The Thompson Shed, built 1989. Preserved as a symbol of community spirit. The cheer that followed rattled the tin roof. Evelyn wiped tears from her cheeks. Earl slapped my back so hard I nearly stumbled. Even little Tommy Martinez traced his fingers across the plaque, whispering, "This is history." I stepped back, looking at the shed glowing in the lantern light. Its boards were weathered. The roof bore scars from storms, but it stood tall, stronger than Karen, Stronger than fear, she wanted it gone. Instead, she made it eternal by summertime. The story of our cedar shed had spilled far beyond Maple Ridge. At first, it was a short piece in the county paper, the shed that wouldn't fall. Then came a local television crew. Cameras set up right in my backyard, recording kids painting murals on the shed doors while neighbors laughed around picnic tables. And then, bam, it went national. News outlets ran headlines like, "One man's shed sparks HOA revolt." When a community said no, I stood in front of that shed, Nancy by my side, Earl leaning against the fence, and told the story straight into the cameras, the fines, the threats, the recall, the way Karen had tried to erase more than wood and nails. She tried to erase our history. The clip spread online like wildfire. People from coast to coast were talking about our shed. Letters and emails flooded in. A man from Michigan wrote, "They told me to take down the greenhouse my wife built before she passed. Your fight gave me the courage to say no." A woman in Arizona said our HOA banned porch swings. We're fighting back after seeing your story. An entire neighborhood in North Carolina mailed us a photo of 30 families gathered around their old tool shed, holding a banner that read, "Roots run deep, we stand with Maple Ridge." I sat at the kitchen table. Letters spread like a quilt. Bender resting beside me. Nancy touched my hand and whispered, "Bill, your grandfather thought he built a shed. Turns out, he built a movement." Invitations started pouring in too. One Saturday, I drove out to a neighboring town where their HOA had banned backyard clotheslines. Families were frustrated, but afraid to push back. I walked into their community hall with my red binder under my arm, flipped it open to show the stack of violation notices Karen had showered us with, and said, "They can bury you in paper, but they can't take what you refuse to surrender if you stand together." By the end of the night, that town voted to recall their board. On the ride home, Earl slapped the dashboard and said, "Bill, never thought I'd see the day a shed took down whole armies of Karens." Back in Maple Ridge, the new board doubled down on celebration. They launched their heritage map. Every so-called violation Karen had once written became a point of pride. The Johnsons' red shed was marked. The Martinez's playhouse. Mrs. Green's garden gnomes. Evelyn's bird feeder. Kids carried copies of the map like treasure hunts, racing from one landmark to the next, learning the stories that made us who we were. And right in the middle sat the crown jewel, my cedar shed. The bronze plaque gleamed in the sunlight. The Thompson shed, built 1989, preserved by the people of Maple Ridge. Neighbors touched it as they passed, like it was a lucky charm. That summer, we threw the first shed festival. Every shed in the neighborhood was dressed to the nines murals. Ribbons, lanterns, even live music played out of one. Families wandered from yard to yard, sampling barbecue, sipping lemonade. kids darting between them with chalk-stained hands. At sunset, everyone gathered by my shed. Strings of lights draped across the roof. Neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder. Kids perched on overturned buckets. Carla stepped forward. Microphone in hand. This shed was supposed to be torn down. Instead, it became the heart of Maple Ridge. Let it remind us all home isn't about compliance. It's about community. The cheer that followed shook the ground beneath our feet. And then came the moment that nearly broke me. A family from Illinois drove 9 hours just to stand in front of my shed. Their little girl ran her hands along the cedar planks and whispered, "Daddy, this is the shed that beat the bad lady." I had to turn away, eyes burning, because yes, it was. Karen wanted this shed erased. Instead, she built it into legend. By the time autumn rolled around again, Maple Ridge didn't look anything like the fearful place Karen once ruled. Lawns were alive with personality colorful flowers, kids' toys, lawn chairs out front instead of hidden away. Mrs. Green's gnomes lined her garden like a tiny army. The Johnsons' bright red shed stood proud. The Martinez's playhouse rang with children's laughter. And in my own backyard, the cedar shed glowed under strings of lanterns. What Karen called an eyesore had become the beating heart of Maple Ridge. One crisp October afternoon, the county came out. They held a little ceremony. Neighbors crowded close, cider steaming in their hands. An official bolted a plaque right into the cedar boards of my shed. The Thompson Shed, built 1989 by William and James Thompson, preserved as a symbol of community spirit. The cheer that rose up rattled the rooftops. Evelyn banged her cane against the dirt like a drum. Earl hollered. Long live the shed. The Martinez kids pressed their palms against the plaque, whispering like they were touching history. Nancy leaned against me, eyes glistening. Your granddad would have been proud. Bill, he built more than a shed. He built a legacy. That night, Maple Ridge threw the biggest celebration I'd ever seen. Lanterns swung from trees. Music drifted across the streets. Fire pits crackled, and laughter rolled like thunder. My backyard overflowed with neighbors, some perched on folding chairs, some leaning against the fence. Kids sprawled across the grass. Everyone smiling. I sat on an old lawn chair, binder resting by my feet. For months, that binder had been my weapon, my shield. Now it was just a relic of a fight we'd already won. Nancy curled beside me, sipping cocoa. Funny, she said. She thought this shed was the problem. Turns out, it was the cure. I ran my hand across the cedar planks. Weathered, scarred, but strong. Stronger than Karen. Stronger than fear. She tried to tear it down. Instead, she made it eternal. And here's the truth I've carried ever since. There will always be Karens. Folks who hide behind rules and clipboards. Who mistake power for purpose. but there will also always be sheds, porches, driveways, gardens, things built with love, rooted in memory, too strong to be erased. So, when the notice shows up in your mailbox when someone tells you to tear down what matters most, what will you do? Fold or fight? Me, I fought. And every creak of these cedar boards, every cheer that still echoes through Maple Ridge, whispers the same answer: stand.